In the latest episode of the Mecklenburg Board of County Commissioners, District 1 Representative Elaine Powell took on a new role.
And I represent District 1.
Playing the part of young assassin Arya Stark from Game of Thrones.
When people ask you what happened here, tell them the North remembers.
There's a very bad feeling in North Mecklenburg. They remember. They haven't forgotten.
It's hard to forget the promise of the Lynx Red Line, a light rail system that would connect Davidson to Charlotte that has never materialized. Residents there have been paying a half-cent transit sales tax for over 2 decades that many feel they never received any benefit from.
There is zero enthusiasm for this plan in District 1. But it's worse than zero. It's offensive to so many people who live in my district who believed that they would have a light rail more than 20 years ago.
Now, Charlotte leaders are proposing a countywide 1 cent increase to the sales tax to pay for the transformational mobility network, with most of the money going to the Silver Line running east to west across Mecklenburg County. Huntersville Mayor John Anarala told WBTV he would not support the tax increase, saying, quote, "It's a real high hurdle to vote for something they promised 23 years ago." While Arya Stark just finished poisoning all of House Frey, all North Mecklenburg residents can do is vote.
If you want support from District 1, you're gonna have to come up with something much different and some big guarantees.
In Charlotte, David Hodges, WBTV, on your side.
Plan to improve Charlotte area transportation has dropped off the map. A WBTV investigation shows city manager Marcus Jones has missed his own deadlines for providing new information about Charlotte's transformational mobility network.
WBTV's investigative reporter David Hodges goes searching for the project that just a few months ago was one of the top priorities in the city.
At the start of 2021, few City of Charlotte priorities had more attention than the transformational mobility network. But lately, the project has gone missing from council agendas.
I've publicly stated I wouldn't support it under any circumstances.
Right before the plan went MIA, Huntersville Mayor John Anarala and others came out against a proposed 1 cent sales tax to fund the project. A likely delay for elections this November also means it's almost certain the mobility network tax won't be in front of voters this year. But money, costs, and taxes have always been the hot button issue. The project was estimated at $8 to $12 billion, with the countywide sales tax covering half of those costs.
I thought from the very beginning that the task force, which was Charlotte specific, we should have engaged early on members of the county.
I spoke with Ken May and Eric Zaverl. Both served on the Charlotte Moves task force that made recommendations about the plan. I asked them what the city could have done differently in hindsight.
Some way of maybe suggesting that, we had more voices for that as well in the room. We could have avoided some of the pushback that we initially saw.
And I think that was a strategic error by not engaging them early.
And as city leaders started discussing new priorities for the project to make more people happy with the plan, talk of a new price tag also emerged in February from city manager Marcus Jones.
We do have some different numbers, and I'd like to get those cleaned up a bit before we start producing a new set of numbers. Is that fair?
Immediately, WBTV filed a record request for emails from city staffers that would likely show some of those numbers. That request still hasn't been fulfilled, but on March 1st, Jones gave a new timeline for providing those answers.
We would come back at the 22nd of this month with more information for you regarding the legislation and the refining the financial assumption.
That day came and went. Still no public update on the projected cost of the mobility plan. We asked a city spokesperson to answer the cost question and whether there's a new timeline for the mobility plan. A spokesperson emailed back, quote, "The city is working with our partners and we have engaged with stakeholders and brought on consultants as we are continuing that work to develop the necessary strategies to bring this vision to life." The city also pointed to comments Jones made during an April meeting, but he didn't provide any new answers then either.
We are continuing to do the analysis. We are continuing to have the legislation to make sure the legislation is correct. as well as the financing and the sequencing of the lines.
The question of cost remains elusive, just as it often felt to task force members who were there from the very beginning.
We never got to where that came from.
We always kept asking about the funding, right?
The city has started working with its partners on an economic impact study for the plan, but that doesn't have anything to do with the actual cost of the project. You can read more details about that on our website. That's WBTV.com. In Charlotte, David Hodges, WBTV, on your side.
David will keep digging on it, you know that. Tonight, new emails obtained by WBTV raise serious questions about whether Charlotte City Council officials misled residents about the cost of the city's massive transportation plan. The city rolled out the plan earlier this year, but quickly shelved it after mixed reaction to a proposed 1-cent sales tax to pay for it. Now the new emails obtained by WBTV investigative reporter David Hodges show city staff withheld information and underestimated the plan's cost by billions of dollars.
Long before the 2040 plan took control of the public dialogue, Charlotte's transformational mobility network was the big talker in town. The TMN was a plan to improve Charlotte's buses, sidewalks, greenways, and light rail by introducing a new countywide 1-cent sales tax to pay for it.
There is zero enthusiasm for this plan in District 1.
I've publicly stated I wouldn't support it under any circumstances.
But opposition from northern parts of Mecklenburg County caused a reset. Just before the plan went back to the drawing board, City Manager Marcus Jones said this.
So we are refining our legislative ask and also refining the financial assumptions.
Financial assumptions is just government speak for costs. The projected cost presented so far was anywhere between $8 and $12 billion. After Jones' comment, we decided to file a record request for emails from Planning Director Taiwo Jayoba and Chief Financial Officer Kelly Flannery to find out what that real cost was. After months of waiting and calling out the city for how long it takes to produce emails, we finally received some of them. The first one that stood out was this one from Special Assistant to the City Manager Sean Heath. He wrote, quote, "The $8 to $12 billion range from the task force report is just capital costs. When taking operating and financing costs into account, I believe the 30-year all-in is more along the lines of $20 billion.
We all know that when we have estimates from government, it always tends to be a lot higher. And the question is, how do you pay for these things?
We took our findings to Huntersville Mayor John Anarala, who was one of the most outspoken critics of the plan.
The devil's in the details, and we still haven't received all the details.
We tried getting those details and an explanation about this new cost from Heath and Jayoba after a recent city council meeting. Is this not a little bit misleading to what the public's been told so far?
Actually not. So internally, we had dialogues, not just with ourselves, but also with the chief financial officer and also our director of transportation and transit, and say, okay, what works and what doesn't.
Is that still the cost y'all are projecting right now?
So that wasn't really a formal analysis on my part, just really our first opportunity to start peeling back the onion associated with the task force report and asking questions about the assumptions and the estimates.
Email showed there was a lot of internal dialogue among city staff, and some of it raised questions about whether city officials were fully transparent with council, other towns, and the public. In one email, Flannery wrote she would prefer to share new financial assumptions they had discussed, but her plan was thwarted by the city manager, Marcus Jones. She wrote, quote, "Until we know what we're doing on the city side, it is irresponsible and a waste of time to contemplate external components. The manager would like a call with the group for me to share our existing model." She wrote she would comply in the spirit of following directions. In an email, City Manager Marcus Jones responded that early in the process, quote, "We realized that the initial estimates for both the potential costs and potential revenues were likely low. Rather than rush out a new set of estimates, I decided that it would be more productive to wait and ensure staff had enough time to do their work so that we feel confident in the numbers and strategies we use moving forward." City staff will be presenting some of this internal work to City Council next week, including the total cost estimate, which is potentially billions more than what had previously been discussed. Do you think the number you present potentially on Monday is going to be wildly different than that?
It's not going to be widely different, I wouldn't say that.
Reporting in Charlotte, David Hodges, WBTV, on your side.
David, thank you. We have more on this story during On Your Side tonight. We're taking a closer look at one of the major goals of this mobility plan, the Red Line. Remember that? It was promised 20 years ago to connect Davidson to Charlotte with light rail. It still hasn't happened. We're taking a closer look tonight at 7:30.
More of your tax dollars being spent. Charlotte city leaders admitted the cost of a massive transit project is billions more than what was originally presented. This after a WBTV investigation we aired last week also showed a higher price tag and pointed out information being kept from the public. Well, tonight, WBTV investigative reporter David Hodges continues his investigation that got city leaders taking another look at the numbers. New.
Both the city manager and council members referenced our investigation from last week, pointing out that the cost of the Transformational Mobility Network was billions of dollars more than what was originally projected. Now the question is just how much credibility does the city have on this project? Let's begin with last Tuesday. A WBTV investigation we aired showed emails from city leaders admitting the cost of Charlotte's Transformational Mobility Network was at least $20 billion, much more than the original projection of $8 to $12 billion. Our report caught the eye of Republican Councilmember Tark Bakari, and Monday night, he said as much.
All the way to $8 billion in additional known costs being hidden from council and the public.
Monday night, Charlotte City Manager Marcus Jones and consultants the city hired presented their updated cost estimates.
I will tell you that with this update tonight, the costs are more.
But the city still didn't present the whole picture. The presentation showed the capital cost at $13.5 billion. That includes pushing some projects out so they won't be completed until 2041 and assuming debt that won't be paid back until 2070. But the email obtained by WBTV included cost estimates for operations and maintenance as well as financing the project. The presentation Monday night did not. Here's what City Manager Marcus Jones said about why that's the case.
I do want to talk a little bit about financing costs, which is important. I think that came out last week in an article. I will tell you there's no project that we've ever done that includes the financing costs.
Even without presenting those costs, Jones claimed that a 1-cent sales tax, which is still being debated, would pay for everything when including possible matches from the federal government.
It covers the capital costs, the operating costs, and the financing costs.
In order to get that 1-cent sales tax, the city needs approval from the General Assembly and Mecklenburg County residents. Some council members have doubts about the strategy from the city so far.
I have to say I'm happy that at last we are having this conversation after spending a year wondering why we were not being more thoughtful about finances and about recruiting our partners.
This plan, as designed by the people who delivered, is dead in the water. It's quite simple. The General Assembly and the towns will not have the trust necessary as long as we keep treating our partners like pawns.
In Charlotte, David Hodges, WBTV, on your side.